Good afternoon. 안녕하세요. I will be talking today about how the world gets into our brain. So I called the subtitle this talk A Journey into Perception because that is what I'm interested in. I'm interested in trying to find out how the brain works, how we perceive, how we see, how we interpret, how we make sense of the world that's around us. So, to start us off, I will do a test with you. So, I will, in the next slide, present one image very quickly. Yes? Afterwards, you need to tell me what you saw. Okay? It's just one very quick flash, and you need to tell me what you saw. So please, just look here and pay close attention. It's just very brief. Okay. What did you see? Did you see something? Street? China? Anything? Was it day or night? Day? What was the weather like? Good weather? Bad weather? Okay. So it was in China, you say? China? Maybe? Were there people? Did you see people? Signs? Some street scene in China? Were there cars? Yeah? Cars? So, I'll show this to you again. And it's all good, all correct. Actually, there are a couple of people here, but they're blurry. It is in China, it's in Hong Kong. You can see cars. The daytime is a little bit tricky because, there's too many signs to really see, but from the illumination here, you can probably see it's day, and you are correct. So what you just did is to show how quickly the brain can interpret the world. You just saw this image for a couple of milliseconds, and it was enough to tell you where it was, what was on the image, what day it was, even the weather, some objects. So your brain can do this, despite the fact that you show the image just for a very, very brief time. And when you think about it, when I look at you, when you walk around, this happens every millisecond. You get this stuff every millisecond. You get millions of pixels every second. And every second your brain is flooded with all of this information. And of course, you don't have any problem with interpreting it. But if you think about it, it's amazing. It's a miracle that you can do this. Take this mass of pixels and turn it into something that you can really interpret. So I'm interested in trying to describe this flood of information that we receive at every second. And I'm interested in describing what kind of abilities the brain has to make sense out of this flood of information. If you do, for those of you interested in computers, if you do a rough estimate of how fast the brain can operate, then the raw clock speed of the brain is around 20 million billion operations per second. So that's 20 million gigaflops. So that's a lot of processing power. And we have this because we have many, many neurons in our brain that can do this. Now I myself, I'm not a neuronal analysis person. I'm more interested in the algorithms. I'm interested in the algorithms that our brain uses to tell you all these things. And I'm interested basically in answering the question, really, how does the world, Hong Kong street, Korea, this room, how does it get into our brain, and what does it look like in our brain? So I will tell you a little bit about this today. I will tell you more specifically about why actually seeing is impossible mathematically. It's impossible. I will tell you why. And I'll also tell you why the brain does it. I mean, we see every second. How does we do it, even though it's impossible? I'll tell you how things are represented in the brain. I will tell you why touching things actually helps. I will also tell you how faces and facial expressions are processed. These are all things that interested me in my research. And this will be a very broad talk, so I will not go into very much detail. If you have any question during the talk, just throw something at me, you know. Just shout and ask a question. Okay, let's do. So let's take another scene like this. This is a computer-generated scene, and you can see many chairs, yeah? All right. Now notice that there are many chairs, and you don't have any problem to tell that there are chairs, even though this is a strange one, even though you can probably tell that this might be a table instead of a chair, but you can sit on it. You can also see that this is a chair, but it's a model chair. But notice in the image, the size of this chair is the same as the size of this chair. But you say, I can sit on this chair, I cannot sit on this chair. And your brain can do this. Similarly, you can see there's a lamp highlighting this chair, and there's a shadow here. Notice that the outline of this shadow is exactly the same outline as this chair. But you will say, I cannot sit on this chair. I can sit on this chair. So all of these things your brain can do automatically. It doesn't take you any effort to do this. And I'm really interested in trying to describe how that happens. So I will first describe you what we know, and it will be very broad about how we process these things in the brain very, very slowly. So this is a cycle of what is called the perceptual process. This is what happens in the brain continuously. And I will take you through that cycle now with that image as an example. So we start here on this cycle. When you are looking at this, this is called the environmental stimulus. This is everything. This is your environment. Now this is this lecture room here. You see this image, but of course you have sound, smell, touch, proprioception, pain, temperature, everything. All of this happens at the same time. So this is the environment, and you can potentially perceive all of this. So that's how you start. Now let's imagine you take a look at this chair. That's because your eye happened to focus that chair, and it's very strange also, you know, chair on a ceiling, strange. So let's say you focus here, your eyes look here. So this is called the attended stimulus. That's where you look. That's where your attention is right now. So then, where you look, this part of the image gets thrown into your eye and gets projected onto the back of the eye. This is called the retina. This is like a camera, except that you have two and that they are very expensive to replace. So in the back of the retina you have this image. It's actually upside down, but it doesn't matter. This is called stimulus projection, or stimulus projected onto the receptors. So this is optics, this is physics. You know, nothing magic is happening here yet. Then something magic happens. You have light coming in. The light hits some kind of receptors here. These receptors are magic in that they convert the light energy into chemical energy. This chemical energy then sends pulses to these cells here, and these cells, these ganglion cells here, what they're called, they process this stuff. So they send on when you detect something. They said, okay, this receptor saw something red. This receptor saw something green. Okay? So this is called transduction because it converts the photons, the light, into chemical energy or electrical pulses. Now the real magic happens. These are your two eyes. They look out into the world. They are somehow weirdly wired into your brain. This is a slice through the brain, okay? And the signal starts, here's the retina, back of the retina, here's the optic nerve, takes information from both eyes, twiddles them together, and sends them through this way station back to the back of the brain. The back of the brain is here. This is where your visual stuff gets processed. And if you ask me, this is very stupid. Why the hell see something in front and process in the back? It's very stupid. And no one has been able to come up with a good explanation for this yet. So it just takes a long time actually to go from the signals to go from here to there, but that's how it is. This is where the magic happens, because that is when the chemical impulses that your receptors give you get processed. That's where in this pathway up to here and then in the rest of the brain, that's where the neurons, which are shown here in the back, do their magic. That's where the algorithms happen. That's where you start to see it's Hong Kong, it's cars, and so on. It's a chair. This is the processing stage. The result of the processing stage is that you are aware of something. Actually, you say, something is there. This is just perception, okay? This is the first stage. Something is there. I know something is there. Of course, you want to know what is there. This is the recognition stage, next stage in the processing. It says, there's a chair, and there's a chair on the ceiling. Okay, now you've labeled it, you put some name to it. Okay, now this is like the end result of processing. Of course, we're not finished yet, because after you perceive something, you want to do something usually. And if there's a chair on the ceiling, you better take action, because it could fall down. So this is the action you do because you've recognized something. And, this chair will fall down, so I better do this. Yeah? But, of course, any of these stages gets influenced by the knowledge that the brain has. In fact, at this stage, or this stage, or this stage, you know that this might be a lamp because it's on the ceiling. It stays on the ceiling, it's not likely to fall down. It's just a weird chair lamp. You're welcome to build one if you want. So at any of these stages, the processing can be influenced by what the brain already knows about the world. So this is the perceptual cycle, and it goes on and on and on. Every time, every millisecond, you do this. Okay? So this is very, very broad overview of what happens. So now, of course, if I'm a scientist, I want to understand this whole cycle here. I want to understand what happens. More specifically, I want to know how I go from what I see, perceive, what's out there. I want to know how I go to perception, how I go to processing, and how these things influence each other. And I will tell you how we analyze this. You can analyze the relationship between the environment and perception by doing something that's called psychophysics. Psychophysics is an interesting term because it's a mix of psychology, the study of the mind, with physics, the study of how mathematical relationship impinge on the world. This was coined by a German physiologist in 1860, and he wrote a very influential book on this, and this is really a very principled mathematical relationship that describes stimulus-perception relationships. And he was really doing mathematics with it. This is serious business. So you can analyze the relationship between what I see and what I perceive using this kind of terminology. You do experiments and then you find out what happens. You can, of course, also analyze the relationship between the environmental stimulus and the processing. For this, you need to stick an electrode into the brain and record what the neuron does. Yeah? You can see those firing rates here, that's the jiggles. This is what the neuron reacts when it sees the chair. This is, strictly speaking, just the relationship between the stimulus and the processing. And you will be able to understand how neurons react to this. Closing that cycle is something which you may have seen about. This is called imaging studies, where you, for example, put a person into the scanner, and the scanner looks at the brain activity, and if the person actually says chair, you can see, okay, this processes in the brain, these regions light up, so you have linked processing and perception. Okay? So these are basically roughly the three kinds of things you can do when you want to understand how perception works, how the brain works. Okay? You can either do something that the Germans invented, or do something that records neurons, or do fMRI. Preferably, of course, you want to understand everything, so you do all of it. So this is the broad background now. Now I told you that I want to tell you that seeing is actually impossible. And I want to use this slide to describe it. So imagine you've got this chair. It's a little bit different, but it's upside down. This chair is out in the world. This chair, of course, is three-dimensional. It has 3 dimensions. Yeah, it's a real object. It gets thrown onto the back of the retina, gets deformed, and it loses 1 dimension because it's just a picture. So we now lose 1 dimension. Now what happens after that is the brain comes and, it's processed here and then goes through the whole brain, does a lot of processing, and somehow are we able to find the lost dimension again? Can we reconstruct this? No, we cannot. We lose a whole dimension here. This is not possible. It's mathematically not possible. You throw away 1 dimension, 1 whole dimension, you cannot reconstruct it. So actually seeing as a reconstruction problem is mathematically not possible. It's impossible. You can't do it. But of course that we do it. So how do we do it? Well, I told you, you need to know something about the world. You need to know how a chair usually looks like. So this is the usual way that things are done. So this is from 3D to 2D. This is an old etching by Albrecht Dürer, where you can see here you have an object and you put a line here, and then where the line hits the canvas, you draw a dot. This is perspective projection. Yeah? So they found this, they didn't invent this, they found this in the 15th century, and this is how you draw a picture from this object from where this guy is looking. So this you can do. But the opposite is the problem. If I have this picture, any of these objects gives you this picture. Any of these objects give you this picture, because you lose 1 dimension. So why the hell do you interpret this as a cube? You see a cube here. You don't see those kind of weird objects. You see this because your brain assumes something about the world. It has knowledge. For example, most things have planar surfaces. Things are compact. Things are convex. These are sensible assumptions in the real world which the brain has learned. The brain has learned this in a long, long time by going out into the world, seeing things, interacting with things. This is why you see this as a cube and not as a crazy object like this. Even though mathematically, all of these guys would be possible. So, I show you this. Yeah? Wonderful cube. Okay, cube stops. This is the picture you see. You see this as a cube, despite the fact that I've shown you this as a cube. Now let's take this guy. Also looks like a cube, but whoa. I'll show you another one, just because it's fun. Oh. So, we see this as a cube, because that's the best interpretation. However, the real world behind that was a crazy object. But those crazy objects do not occur often, so that's why our brain says, all right, that's a cube. That's it. So seeing is impossible. In fact, you do not know the real object. When you look at this, you cannot know that this object actually is like this. You assume it's a cube, but it's wrong. So sometimes the brain assumes something wrong. Usually it is correct. But in this case, it was sadly wrong. Same thing here. This is a heap of garbage. If you put a light here, this is the shadow. So you can see here, if you look closely, where is it? Here is the cigarette. You can see the cigarette. Here's the glass. The shadow of this heap of garbage gives you this beautiful couple leaning next to each other. Of course, this is the exact same things, This is what we see, and of course we assume it's a couple sitting, relaxing, chilling out, when in fact it's a heap of garbage. This is exactly this point. We lose a dimension. And this is a very dramatic illustration of losing this dimension. Yeah? So our brain needs to make an assumption. This assumption is consistent with people, but it may not be true. It is true most of the time, though. Here's another one. If I ask you, are these holes in the wall, or are these pebbles on the wall? What do you think? Holes or pebbles? Okay, pebbles. Now? Huh? I just turned the image upside down. That's it. You can go back if you want. So again, your brain is wrong. Your brain is very wrong. Actually, I don't even know what it was. I think it was both. Why the brain cannot do this? Again, mathematically, it was not possible to do 3 dimensions here for your brain. So it assumes something. And what it assumes is, I'll show this to you in the next slide so you can compare side by side. The brain assumes that light comes from above. If light comes from above, then this stuff here, if it's a pebble, then the top will be bright and the bottom will be dark. Then it's a pebble. If the light comes from above, then here the inside of the hole will be bright and this top part of the hole will be dark. That's why you do this. You assume there's sun coming from above. And then you interpret it that way. So again, you've noticed something now, namely that the brain has an assumption. And these kind of pictures tell you this assumption. Here's another one which you may know. This is a mask of a face, and I'll rotate it for you. Where? Looks strange, right? I'll do this with the other one. It looks like there's always a face looking at you, right? It looks very strange. But what you actually did is you looked inside of the mask. But of course, in real life, faces are not like this. Faces are not an inverted mask. Faces look towards you. They don't look away from you. They don't look like this. Faces look like this. So it's the same assumption. Our brain knows something about objects, and this causes you to see this in this strange way. Again, if the brain would not make this assumption, you couldn't do any interpretation. But because the brain knows this is a face, it makes this kind of assumption. So again, there's only prior knowledge. It's only what the brain knows that makes you able to see this. And this picture shows you the assumption. The assumption here is objects and faces are curved towards you, never away from you. This would be not a real face. So, the brain has some very smart algorithms that help you to make sense of the world. And these algorithms use information about the world that capture common sense. It captures stuff that happens usually. For example, objects have small variability in angles. Light comes from above. Faces are convex, curved towards you, not curved away from you. And so on. There's many, many, many more. And all these algorithms, only these algorithms together with this information that allow the brain to actually interpret the 2D picture you get on the retina as a 3D world reality. It's only through this use of these kind of assumptions that we can actually see in 3D. It's only through this that seeing is not impossible. So, I'm actually interested in a little bit more. I'm interested in all of these guys. These are all objects, lots of them, different things. And I want to know how in the brain we represent those objects. How the brain does the magic that I showed you earlier when you said this is Hong Kong, this is China, this is car, this is street, and so on. How does the brain represent all of this? When you think about how many objects you know, how many things you know in the world, it's massive. You know millions of things. But if you had a database like this, it would take you a lot of time to search through this database to recognize an object. It takes much too long. It's also silly to do it like this. So somehow you need to make sense, you need to put structure into this mess, okay? You know so many things, you need to put some kind of structure into this mess. So how do we make sense of things in the world? And then effectively we ask, what is the representation of objects in the world and in the brain? This could be a potential representation of objects. It's just labels, words. You know, we have them. You know, lots of words. Lots of words about objects, buildings, paintings, ceilings, curtains, walls. We all know these words. This could be a representation, but sadly, it's not visual. This is a linguistic representation. It's a semantic representation. Maybe we have something like this, but also it's a mess of words. Most likely, our linguistic representation does not look like this. So also this, maybe we need to be a little bit smarter. Now we know actually that linguistically it makes sense to group things. So we know they're animals. Horse, cow is a type of animal. We know that vehicles, cars, vans, and trucks are also types of vehicles. If we want to put a chair somewhere, we don't put it near the animal, we don't put it near the vehicle, we make another category, maybe furniture. This is how our world is structured. So our outside world actually has structure, a lot of structure, functional structure, visual structure, lots of structures. So it actually makes sense that the brain represents this structure explicitly because it exists around us. Things make sense in a certain way. And there's this very famous fellow here called Roger Shepard who proposed that the brain represents objects in what is called a perceptual space, a real space in the brain. And it is used to sort the objects like this. And I'll show you an example in the next slide what such a perceptual space may look like. So here you see lots of pictures of objects. And they're somehow arranged. You can see there are some faces here. I put Roger Shepard here. You can see objects here. You can see signs here. You can see fruit here. You can see animals here. You can see human faces. And you can see monkey faces here, but they're side by side. So this is a perceptual space. This makes sense because objects that are similar are also close together. And categories that are similar are close together. Also, you can see that there's kind of a distinction between natural objects here on this side and artificial objects on this side. So this is the kind of space we're talking about. This is a representational space in the brain. If you see Roger Shepard and you look into this space, you immediately know, well, it must be a face because it's at that location. You also say that Roger Shepard may be descended from a monkey because he's very close. And so on. So you can make those kind of statements in such a representational perceptual space. And this is what Roger Shepard proposed. He proposed this because things in the world have similarities. They are similar. And this is a structure, a space like this allows you to represent those similarities and this real world structures by using proximity or distance in a space. So how do you investigate those perceptual spaces? You investigate them using an algorithm that he invented as well, which is called multidimensional scaling. Actually, it's not very important what it's called, it's more important what it does, and I'll explain this to you now. So imagine you have 4 cities, A, B, C, and D. You measure the distance between the cities. Sometimes you have this on the back of maps, and you measure the distance between all possible cities. So if this is Busan, and this is Seoul, and this is Sokcho, and this is Daejeon, then you measure the distances between all of these cities, and you put them in a matrix. So you know from basically Seoul to Seoul, well, there's nothing. Then from Seoul to Daejeon, it's this far. From Seoul to Sokcho is this far. And from Seoul to Busan, it's this far. And then you have a matrix of distances. Now, this matrix encodes this map. Yeah? If you know this distance is here, it should somehow lead you back to the map, because that's how you measured it, right? You measured it on the map. So this algorithm does exactly this. It takes a matrix of those distances or similarities and converts it back into a map. So what you need to do is you need to ask people or measure some kind of distance in the world between objects. And then, if the objects are close together, they get a high similarity. If the objects are far apart, they get a low similarity. And this algorithm then reconstructs the map. Okay? So this algorithm takes distances or similarities and converts it into a map. And this is exactly what we need to investigate the map of things in the brain. So I want to talk a little bit more about shape. This is a picture of a cup. If I ask you to imagine what it feels like to touch the cup, well, you would say probably this is cool. This will be warmer to the touch. You would say this is soft and very, very smooth. And this has a little bit texture, it has surface. How can you do this? You can do this because you've touched things like this before. Yeah? You've experienced what it is to hold a cup of porcelain, to touch wood. So the trick is, in a lot of these things, we just focus on our eyes. But in fact, of course, humans have many sensors, many sensory organs, and we use them all the time. This is a more extreme example, which plays with shape perception. This is a surrealist piece of art. This is a modern museum of art in New York. And, well, it's a fur-covered cup. And of course, you recognize both things. You recognize it's a cup. You also recognize it's a strange material. And she was playing with this kind of idea, with this kind of conception in your mind. Of course, you probably wouldn't want to drink from this, but you can imagine what it feels like to touch it. So, humans do not only see the world, we smell it, we taste it, we hear, and we touch. And we do many more things. And more importantly, as you can see, we do this from day one. A baby doesn't just sit there or lie there and look. A baby touches, smells, puts things in the mouth, interacts with things all the time, from day one. In fact, if you're a parent, you know that this is, crazy. So, since day one, we use all of this in combination. So somehow, how we perceive the world, how we see the world, must be also influenced by how we touch or smell or something like this. Yeah? All the senses combined. So, I want to investigate how the brain represents objects from vision, from seeing, and from touching at the same time. So I need to investigate this kind of space because I believe that how we touch things is very, very important for us. So I need some way to investigate this. So how do I investigate this? I need to create objects that we can touch. So I use the computer to create those. I use this kind of cool machine, which is a 3D printer. And I print those objects in 3D. And because I exactly know what I print, because I've created on the computer, this allows me really to understand what I present to people. Yeah? So I will test people with objects like this. So I will create some kind of physical space which I know. I have control over this. Then I'll present it to people. Here you can see a person touching this. Yeah, just touching the object. Then I use the magic algorithm MDS to recover what they perceive in their brain. Yeah? So this step is done by this algorithm. This person touches the object and says, oh, this is pretty similar to the previous one. So I make a note in my matrix. Next object, well, dissimilar. I make a different note in my matrix. And at the end, I use this multidimensional scaling, and it recovers what is inside the person's perception for this experiment. So let me show you an example of this. I created this space because I was interested in how we perceive shape and texture. So I start with this weird object here, and then I put texture on the object. You can see a little bit more, a lot. So this is very prickly. And here in this direction here, I blur the object. I make it smoother and smoother and smoother. I change the shape of the object. And I do all things combined. Yeah? So this is my physical space. This is my world. And I present this world to your brain. And I present this world to your brain when you look at the object. Here you can see them printed out. This is another 3D printer. You print them out, they look like this. When you look at these objects, you will probably say they're very dissimilar. They're not similar. And I also let you touch these objects without seeing them. And then you say, well, there's probably also very dissimilar. And I'm interested to see whether how you touch the object is different from how you look at the object. So we compare what you reconstruct using vision with how you compare using touch. So I'll show you the result. This is the actual map in the brain. So the input to this was, as you can see here are the numbers of the original objects. It's very regular grid. And the black dots are the reconstructed perceptual positions. This is what happens in your brain. This is how you represent relationships in the brain. That's the black dots. And the fun thing about this is the exact same space whether you look at the object or you touch the object. Exactly the same thing. So, because these maps are similar in vision and in touch, it may mean that actually there's only one perceptual space. It doesn't matter whether you touch things or whether you look at things or whether you smell things. As long as we're talking about shared things, well, they're shared. The brain uses the same kind of idea about the world, whether you touch it or whether you look at it. So we went a little bit more crazy with this. These dimensions we tested were shape and texture. It's very intuitive. So we thought, how about something crazy mathematical? So we took this model here, which has a lot of parameters, which actually is a model that can simulate shells. So here are some outputs of shells. Yeah, this is math. This is the formula, an equation like this. You put in some numbers, it creates those different kinds of objects. So these numbers here do not have any perceptual meaning to the people. But still, we wanted to take some numbers here and wanted to test whether people can represent such a crazy space as well. So we created some space of shells and gave it to people, asked them to touch it or to look at it, and then compared what happened. So I'll take you through this one. We created, this is a physical space. This is like cities on a map, okay? So here's Seoul, here's Busan, here's another city. Except now they live in this weird mathematical space. And they happen to make this Y shape in this mathematical space. This is how I define it. I control the world in this experiment, yeah? So now I give it to people. They look at this. They give me similarity ratings. This is what I reconstruct from their brain. I reconstruct from this data a Y shape. Wow, wonderful. I can get the same kind of shape in the brain than what I put in. This is very good. Now let people touch it. I can get a Y shape. You can see the Y shape here. And they're very similar. And I do this with a different Y shape in a different kind of direction. Get two Ys, I get another one, I get two Ys. So again, even though I put in some crazy parameters, some crazy equations here, our brain can reconstruct this mathematical relationship. And it can do this when you look at these objects and when you touch the objects. Again, the only thing I'm doing is I'm giving you one object and I'm giving you another object and I ask you to give me a number how similar they are. That's all you can do. You never see all objects at the same time. Sorry for the slide, it went on. So, just want to go back to this once more. So, visual and what is called haptic or touch representation. Visual and touch representation are very, very similar. And if you imagine how you do this, you touch an object, you need to explore it, you need to touch it from all sides. It's very different from looking at an object. Still, the brain can do this. The brain can reconstruct these kind of very complicated relationships from looking and touching. So that's the gist of these things. So now, I would just want to show you one thing more, because it's fun to do. So you say, what meaning has this? And I say, we can build better robots now. So this is a robot that is in Italy. It's called iCub because it has sort of the features of a 4-year-old child, roughly. Also, he's like this tall. And he's exploring these objects. So you give him a boring paper cup, and these paper cups are all different. And it tries to look at these paper cups and explore them. It doesn't know anything about paper cups yet. It's like a child, except, a very expensive child. And you can see what the robot actually sees, because it can look. You can see here, and it turns the object just like a child would do. You give a child something, takes it in hand, explores it. And so we built this system that tries to give the robot lots of different kinds of objects, and then it has to recognize them. And what we could show is just computationally, if the robot can actually explore the object himself or herself, actually you can decide whether it's male or female, if the robot can do this, explore the objects really, the recognition rate is much, much higher. Actually, you can see here, it failed to recognize these objects. It could recognize this object. Now it actually knows how to do it properly, and now it looks at the object and is very smart about things. And then afterwards, while you can actually take the object and look at it, now it can recognize the objects. So again, the story about this is that the robot can combine what the robot sees with what the robot feels or how the hand is oriented. And this exploration allows the robot to be much, much better about this. So you can see here it's all correct, 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 wonderful. Yeah? So we do this, of course, as children. We do this from day one. Children do it all the time. But there's a reason for it. The reason is we are getting much better data. We're getting very good data from touch. We are getting very good data from vision, from looking at things. And you can actually take these kinds of inspirations, bring them to robotics, and build better machines with this. So, we humans, we are very, very good at processing shape. We are so good at this. Because we can touch and look at the same time. And we can explore things actively. We have control. We can manipulate things. Yeah? You can use nice 3D printers and robotics to study these kind of processes. This was not possible before because we didn't have 3D printers. If you have this, you can actually teach robots. If you understand how the humans can do it, you actually can teach robots to do it better. And as you can see, kids like to be interested. These are my kids. They like to be interested in laptops as well, and they do this, from basically day 20 or something. So humans are naturally curious about things. They naturally want to interact with things. We need to teach robots to do the same thing. Yeah, we need to teach robots to use their hands, just like humans do, because we humans do not only see, we act and interact and touch. And I've shown that if you do this, you can do it much better. Also, I've shown that how the brain does it is very smart and can use very, very complicated, can reconstruct very complicated spaces. Now, I'm not done yet. This is just telling you why touching things are better. I want to tell you a few things about faces. So faces are one of the most important objects we know, because we are social animals and we interact with people all the time, so we need to do a lot with faces. A face tells us about a person's sex, race, age, its distinctiveness, facial expression, social status, and so on, and so on, and so on. Lots of information in a face. And of course, you need to process that. Also, as I'll show you, we, primates, including humans and monkeys, have actually machinery in the brain that does only faces. pretty much nothing else. Yeah? We have actually a part in the brain, I'll show it to you, that only does face perception. And of course, if you ask what face processing does in general, it's very important in a lot of fields. So computer vision, cognitive neuroscience. If you look into what articles are published per year that have just the word face recognition in the title, it's 1,800 papers that just have it in the title in 1 year. Yeah, so if you work in face recognition, good luck with reading all of these. So it's hugely important. There's a lot going on because it's so important for us humans. So I want to tell you a few things about what I've done with faces. So basically 5 of those papers were mine. So here's the area in the brain. It's called the face fusiform area. Doesn't matter why it's called that way. It happens to sit at here. This is a frontal view. If I have to show it to you on my brain, it's like if you take this direction and this direction and see where they cross. It's like sitting here in the back here, here, here. So at the intersection of all of these. And we have 2 of those guys. One on the left side and one on the right side. And when you show faces, doesn't matter how they look like, this guy really likes that. This guy is the face area. That's your face module in the brain. If you have damage here, you have problems recognizing faces. Nothing else. Everything else is fine, just faces don't work. Yeah? So this is very, very important. This already tells you that faces are important for us humans because otherwise evolution would not spend any neurons for this if they were not important. So now you can ask, okay, we learned something about objects, about this space, perceptual spaces. You can ask, is there a perceptual face space as well? You know, same idea. How do they represent it? And in fact, this was proposed, of course, and it would look like this. So imagine this is a space here. Every dot is a face. Every dot is a face you know. Then here in the middle is what is called the average. Yeah, it's the average face is in the middle. This is the coordinate system's origin. So now you know a face. So let's say this is a face you know. Yeah? So now you know this average face too. So now you have a direction. Yeah? So now you have a direction connecting this average face to the face you're just seeing right now. So let's imagine you actually go along this direction. What would happen? Well, what will happen is you will make a caricature because you are going away from average. If you're going away from average, you're exaggerating everything. And if you know caricatures in the newspaper, this is exactly what caricaturists do. They exaggerate the facial features. And actually, and now I can tell you why people do it. Why do people exaggerate facial features? They do this because when the face is out here, you can see it has a lot less neighbors because the neighbors are further apart. When a face is in here, you can see it has a lot more neighbors. So if I want to recognize a face that is average, I have a big trouble because there's lots of faces that are very, very similar. But if I want to recognize this guy, well, he's pretty much the only one out there. He's very distinctive. He's a caricature. So this helps you to recognize faces. That's why caricatures do it, so that you can immediately recognize the person who is meant to be like this. Yeah? So that is the idea of a face space. And the fact that caricatures work already is one indication that such a face space really exists in your brain. Yeah? So you represent faces like this. So you can do funny things with this. So this is a database of Korean faces, students that we took from KU. And here's a person. Now we do lots of directions in this face space. So we can go towards a Western version of this person. This is more Caucasian, more Western. We can also make this person more Asian. We can make this person more male or more female. Now notice in each of these things, the only thing that I'm trying to change is I'm just trying to change the gender. So this could actually be this person's sister if you want. because from the face structure here, they're very, very similar. Same here. This could be the person's sort of European cousin. I can make the people decrease weight or increase weight. This is the one way around. I can make the person younger or older. So this allows me to actually create such a face space. And this face space lives in the computer. So I used lots of photos of people to create this face space. And because I know this, I can modify any person like this. And I'm not doing this for fun. I'm doing this because this is actually how the brain seems to represent faces like this. It has a space of this. And this also is a reason why, when I came here first to Korea, unfortunately, everybody here looked the same to me. I'm very sorry. Why? Because I didn't know many Korean faces. So all of the faces I knew were just clustered very closely together. And now I know a lot of Korean faces, so now my perceptual space just gets expanded. Yeah? This is a well-known effect. It's called the other race effect, and you may actually experience it if you go to Europe and you've never seen European faces. They would also look very similar to you. Or maybe you can imagine it with African faces. They all look very similar to you, but no African person says this. They don't say, we all look similar. I can't recognize my neighbor. Of course they can. This is why, because they have a face space and it's optimized towards the faces you see. So I'll tell you another one, how this works. So this is me, part of me, no ears. This is me normally, without ears. This is me upside down, all right? Maybe harder to recognize. This is me very strange. If you look closely, what I've done here is I've just taken the mouth and just rotated it like this. This is me with those eyes rotated like this. If you look closely, it looks strange, right? It looks kind of weird. Now I take this face and I turn it upside down. It doesn't look weird. It does not look weird anymore. In fact, you'll be hard to tell the difference between those two guys. Why? Because you are used to seeing faces upright like this. You're not used to seeing faces like this. So your brain is optimized to see faces upright. And this looks very crazy to you. Now, the fun thing we did is we took monkeys. Everybody likes monkeys. This is a monkey face, a rhesus macaque monkey face. Normal face. Same thing. Turn around. This is this monkey's face doing the same crazy stuff. I turn the mouth 180 degrees and the eyes. For you, it's a monkey face. Yeah, I turn it upside down, nothing happens. For you, this is not strange. Now, what we did is we showed this face to monkeys. And monkeys go crazy when they see this face because they don't like it. Yeah, it looks very strange. It looks as strange as this face looks to me. Yeah, or you. Now, when a monkey looks at this face, he says, yeah, human, boring, give me more bananas. So, this shows you that the faces we have in the brain, they're optimized towards what we saw before, what we have experience with. A monkey does not see very many human faces. I do not see very many monkey faces. But the way we actually look at the faces as monkeys and humans, it's the same. A monkey doesn't like this face, a human doesn't like this face. In fact, you can go even further. We can look at eye tracking. I can look at how humans look at this, where they fixate on these faces. And I can look at where monkeys do this. And you find the way monkeys look at monkeys is the same as the way humans look at humans. But monkeys look at humans differently, and humans look at monkeys differently. So we share something. In fact, monkeys also have this area in the back of the brain for this. Yeah, so they are close relatives, not only genetically, but also in perception, also in face perception. Because monkeys are also social animals, so they need these kinds of processing. So one more thing. Facial expressions. So these are very famous facial expressions in psychology. If I ask you to name them, I won't do this now, but probably you can give me names for them. So this is probably sad, this is happy, this is surprised, this is disgust, this is fear, and this is anger. Maybe you agree with this. In fact, many people agree with this. In fact, if you do research, these expressions are recognized well no matter where you go in the world. And it's just these 6, no more and no less. Yeah? So most cultures in the world agree on these interpretations, on these 6. That's why they're called universal. Now, of course, if I go to the Mars and I meet some Martians, maybe they would disagree, but let's say these are terrestrial expressions. Yeah? So everywhere you go on Earth, people agree about the interpretation and the emotions behind this. Now, so far, so good, and it's very interesting and it's very important. However, in real life, you see mostly this kind of stuff, at least if I look at my son. I at least see some crazy stuff, you know, and of course I have to interpret all of this, otherwise this guy gets angry. So I see many more expressions like this, and in daily life you see many more expressions. In fact, I hope you rarely see a fearful face. I hope you do. In fact, probably you rarely see a disgusted face. Sometimes you do. You may be seeing happy faces often, surprised faces, but really angry faces, maybe I hope you don't see them often. They're important for us, but the stuff I see daily is something very different. The stuff I see daily doesn't have these kind of emotions behind it. But still, we can interpret it. And I'm very interested in describing not only these guys, but all of these guys. So, in order to do this, I try to investigate not only these 6, but these 6. So again, I'm doing the same thing. It's always the same idea. I'm trying to look for the space of facial expressions. We have a space of faces, we have a space of objects. So why not a space of facial expressions? I'm trying to look at what the space of facial expression is in the brain. And because I'm here in Korea, I still want to look for differences between cultures, and because I come from Germany, I want to look for differences in Korea and German expressions and how they differ. So basically, I'm interested in this difference. Yeah, we have one thing in common. We both are led by strong women, except that this woman likes to drink beer, and this woman will probably not be photographed drinking soju, so she had to go for kimchi. So I'm interested in cultural differences. Yeah. Now, to test this, unfortunately, I couldn't use my son, so I had to use other naive people. So I took 20 German people, just random people, they were not actors, and I asked them to give me lots of expressions. Not only 6, lots. Yeah? Lots and lots of different kinds. So we have lots of individual variation. In fact, I'm going to show some of them to you, and they're played slower. This is not the original speed. So this is half speed, so you can recognize or try and interpret it. What kind of expression was that? Pleased? Okay. Any other ideas? Huh? Condescending? Okay. Any other words? Pleasant? Sarcasm. Okay. I'm going to show you the same expression, or it should be the same expression by this person. What was this? It should be the same. Surprised? Okay. Yeah. So, what I'm trying to get at is how far you can go interpreting these kinds of expressions without context. So, I mean, this face comes out of nowhere, it does something. Yeah? In this particular case, it was actually a pleasant surprise or something like this. It was a pleasant agreement. Here's another one. I can show it. The same expression by her. Basically something like, I don't care. Yeah? I don't care. Now, if I tell you this, you say, oh. But if I don't tell you, you have a little bit more trouble with this. But still, you can try. I want to try and see how far I can get with this. Okay, so this is Germans. Now, maybe you have trouble doing Germans because you are not German. So, I need to give you Koreans. What was this? Can you see it? I'm sorry about the quality. Could you see? A little bit? Actually, on my laptop, it's much, much brighter. Maybe I'll show again. Do you see anything? Can you see it a little bit? What is it? Laughing? Happy laughing? Yeah. So this was a simple one. This was a happy laughing face. Now, we did the same thing. So we asked 20 Koreans, and we also asked them, so each of these people give us 50 expressions. I'm just showing 6 or 4 of them here. So we do the same thing. So we have now lots and lots of videos. Now we have over 1,000 video clips of those kinds of expressions. And so now we go to Korea, and we go to Germany, and we ask people to group those videos into some kind of clusters. We ask them to really to watch all of them and just group them together. So this is a lot of work. Now when you put something together in some kind of group, it actually gives you some kind of distance, because things that are in the same group have low distance, things that are in a different group have larger distance. So actually, from this kind of data, we can again do the same multidimensional scaling algorithm. And I'm going to show you the results now. But don't worry, I'll explain them to you as well. This is crazy, so don't worry about this. Each of these dots is one expression. We had a lot of expressions, so that's why there's a lot of dots. Now don't worry about all of these things here. What I'm showing to you here is lots of things that start with SM. SM means smiling. Uncertain smile, relative smile, flirting smile, sad smile, lots of smiles. Sad smile is up here, and so on. So smiling things here. Here is stuff like anger, bothered, thinking about something negative. Down here, we have things like feeling pain. Up here, we have things like bored or sad. So actually, if you think about what this space looks like, there's some kind of 2 dimensions in this space, and these dimensions are what we call valence. You can just simply say good, bad, positive, negative. Smiling things here, angry things here is positive, negative. Up here, we have weak things. Down here, we have strong things. This is pain, anger, disgust, fear. And here is bored, content, sad, tired, stuff like this. So we have 2 dimensions. This dimension here codes for strength, intensity. This dimension here codes for good or bad. And now I should explain these symbols to you that are up here. This is German people looking at the German database. This is Korean people looking at the same database. Yeah? You can see lots of here, smiling things here. You can see anger here. You can see pain down here. You can see sad up here and bothered. So in fact, even though you don't know really Germans, you do the same thing. You have positive things here, negative things here, strong things down here, weak things up here. Now the exact positions in this space are a little different. However, the dimensions are the same. And of course, this is Koreans looking at the Korean database. So we have smile things here, we have pain down here, somewhere here. This is sad. Up here we have angry and so on. So here we have the same dimensions. Good, bad, strong, weak. And this is Germans looking at the Korean expressions. So we have smiling things here, we have sad things here, we have fear down here, disgust, we have bored up here. So again, the same thing. We have strong, weak, good, bad. So actually, it doesn't matter where you come from. You use at least the same dimensions. Now, of course, where each of these guys ends up may be different. And in fact, they may also move around a little bit. However, what we can get from this data is maybe not so much that there is universal expressions, but that there is universal ways to evaluate an expression, namely in terms of good or bad, strong or weak. And in fact, this seems to be enough. This explains a lot of the data already. You can try and find more dimensions, by the way. You can try and find a third dimension, a fourth dimension, a fifth dimension. It's just harder to visualize, so I'll spare you this. So it actually doesn't matter where you go, you use the same kind of evaluation procedures. So, we talked about touch. We talked about faces. For faces, I talked about these perceptual spaces as well. And we've seen that expertise shapes the way you perceive and process faces. I had trouble doing Korean faces. We all have trouble doing monkey faces. Yeah? But monkeys don't have trouble, so it's fine. So, as you become an expert at something, you change the way you process. But still, you have a shape space or face space to help you around. We also see that facial expressions are very complex. There's not only 6. We also saw that the perceptual space for facial expression seems to be good, bad, strong, weak. And this is something that I didn't tell you. Most of these things, of course, that I tested are not strong emotions. They're just things like thinking. I test thinking expressions, or being bothered or something. So it's some kind of weaker things, and maybe sometimes not even emotional things. I tested agree or disagree. It's not a strong emotion. So if you think about the way the face moves, you should also focus on more things that are maybe not only emotional. Okay, brings me to the end almost. So what we saw is the brain uses a lot of smart algorithms and knowledge. Both of these, you need both of these to interpret the world. It is a very good assumption to see that the brain actually represents objects in some kind of ordered space. And this space, of course, reflects real relationships, real world relationships outside in the world. The way shape works, the way facial expression works, the way faces are similar to each other. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense. We also saw that this perceptual space is very similar across senses. So vision and touch actually share the same kind of perceptual space. They can talk to each other. Yeah? This concept of the perceptual space can be applied to pretty much anything you want to get into the brain. Shape, faces, facial expressions, taste, smell, touch, whatever. You can take anything and you can try and see whether it fits into this framework. And so far, it's a very good explanation of how the brain works. Yeah? So I will end with that, and I'll take questions if you guys have any. But I have bonus. I have secret level up. I wanted to show this to you very briefly because it's a very fascinating study. This is the brain from the back. These are colors represent objects, different kinds. In fact, what people show is they show a movie. And this movie contains animals, talks, text, sky, people, devices, buildings, outdoors, materials, everything. And you look at which region of the brain likes each of these objects. And you find pretty much the whole brain being active, which we know. Yeah, the whole brain likes this. And you can try and take the brain activations that you can see here, and you can create a map like this, same space. And lo and behold, this map here has a structure. And the structure is animals and talks and travel and people, all of these people clustered together, animals clustered together, materials clustered together, tools, vehicles. So just from the way that our brain reacts, like the whole brain, just from the way that the brain activates seeing stuff, you can reconstruct this structure. You construct the real semantic, real world structure. And it does make sense because the brain wants to interpret this structure. So you can take this data here and turn it into this and try and interpret what the brain sees. Actually, I'll upload this on the portal, this presentation, and they have an online version of this where you can play around with the brain. And you can see, if I click on, let's say, people, which regions in the brain like people. And it's a very nice toy to play around with. So that's bonus number 1. And bonus number 2 is one of my favorite bonuses. It's the Scottish whiskey taste map, because I love Scottish whiskies. And it has 2 dimensions, light to rich, smoky to delicate, and here's all the whiskies that you can buy, at least some of the nice Scottish malt whiskies. And with that, I'll close, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you for your attention. 감사합니다.